Good morning.
Good morning.
It is good to be back with you. As we approach this election, and especially the aftermath, I think it's important that we reflect on the political virtue of empathy. And that's what my remarks will be this morning. I want to thank those who have come, the guests, especially those who are running for office who are with us this morning. Mark Harris is here, Sarah Lloyd is here. Paul is here. We thank you for what you're doing and for standing up to serve our country at this time. You've taken the slings and arrows of this campaign, and it's been very painful and very difficult for anyone who's running for office. So we thank you very, very much, and we wish you well. Empathy, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is the ability to share someone else's feelings, the capacity to understand and share another person's experiences and their emotions. It comes from two Greek words, em, which means in, or part of, and pathos, which means feeling or pain. We don't live as isolated beings. We need other people. Biologically, we do not survive as a species without cooperation and respect for other humans. We live in communities and thereby are able not only to survive, but to flourish as human beings. Without some community in our lives, we die, physically and spiritually. No community, however, a family, neighborhood, village, city, state, or nation, can flourish without the capacity to sense and appreciate the feelings, thoughts, and needs of others. Aristotle taught that we are social beings by nature, and that politics, in fact, is the conversation of friendly citizens in community, discussing and seeking the good life together. Very positive definition of politics. For these reasons, our polis, or political community, like every other community of which we are part, needs empathy among its citizens to thrive. This does not mean we always agree, nor even that we're always able to reach a consensus on important public issues, no matter how we try. But it does mean that we try to understand our fellow citizens, especially those who hold different views from us regarding the good life together. If our political community is to flourish, we all need empathy, both in understanding and a respect for the experiences of fellow citizens, along with the ability to discuss these civilly. Out of this empathetic process of civil dialogue and debate comes a sense that despite differences of approach over policies, there is a deeper bond, some fundamental values that hold us citizens together in our political community. This is what empathy in the political community produces and what holds us together. Our heritage as Americans always has been confident that we can meet this minimum standard. Our Pledge of Allegiance to the flag reminds us that we are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Even our money reminds us, e pluribus unum. Out of our diversity comes unity. Empathy in civil society makes this pledge, this hope, possible. Because when we practice it together with fellow citizens, we sense, we feel, we believe what unites us in our differences is stronger than what divides us. Now, where are we now? The current election campaign has frayed the deeper bonds of unity among us as citizens, since we're losing the capacity to feel and understand the experiences of those with whom we disagree politically. We hear Donald Trump verbally attacking minorities and immigrants and boasting of his disrespect for women. We have heard Hillary Clinton call Trump supporters losers and claim he does not have the character to be president. The political commercials on television, not only for president, but down the ballot as well, senators, state legislators, local officials, are filled with disrespect and selective marshaling of facts bordering on out-and-out distortions. They appeal to the emotions of fear and disgust. They do not promote a rational understanding of issues. Facts do not seem to matter in candidate speeches. even when independent organizations point out the numerous errors in their claims. The distortions and lies by some candidates and their propaganda machines continue blithely along, bombarding live audiences and media with distortions of the truth without shame or hesitation, even when they've proven to be wrong. Now, I want to read you a couple of quotes from 60 years ago. Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda in Nazi Germany, in 1941 said the following words: "If you tell a big lie enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent. For truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state." The phrase big lie was also used in a report prepared during the war by our own United States Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner of the Central Intelligence Agency, when they described Hitler's own psychological profile in the 1940s. And here were their words: "His primary rules are never allow the public to cool off, never admit a fault or wrong, never concede that there may be some good in your enemy, never leave room for alternatives, never accept blame. Concentrate on one enemy at a time and blame him for everything that goes wrong. People will believe a big lie sooner than a little one. And if you repeat it frequently enough, people will sooner or later believe it." It is not only that Goebbels and Hitler said these words, they put them into operation by large public rallies and the use of the media to whip crowds and the public into a high pitch of anger and hatred. These words and tactics have an eerie tone for us listening to them over 60 years later. In a different context and at a different time, these same words and tactics have a whiff of truth to them as we listen to the political discourse and watch public reactions in our own electoral campaign going on now. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people eventually will come to believe it. Never allow the public to cool off. Never admit a fault or wrong. Never concede that there may be some good in your enemy. Never leave room for alternatives. Never accept blame. It would be sad if these kinds of attacks were just in the domain of political candidates and their media spin doctors. But what is most disturbing is that many American citizens are buying into these distortions and allowing emotions such as anger, fear, and even hatred to boil up in our hearts and actions. When crowds yell, "Lock her up," or more recently, "Execute her" in New Hampshire, when staff members of a presidential candidate plot to disrupt the crowds of opponents with violence, when a political commentator in the media announces, "If the other candidate wins, I am getting a musket," when right racists firebomb a black church in Mississippi and then scrawl on the wall, "Vote for Trump," when Muslim Americans face an uptick of physical and verbal abuse in public not seen since the immediate 9/11 days, when all of this happens in public, we are in danger of serious disarray as a nation and a loss of empathy for one another. Even in private life, the ability to understand and respect political differences is coming apart. Friendships are being lost. Families are seriously divided. In some families, in order to maintain peace, relatives cannot discuss the election with other relatives. Wives and husbands who support different candidates are living in tense fear and silence with one another in different parts of our country. Over 50% of parents who are Republicans say they do not want their child ever to marry a Democrat. And nearly 50% of Democratic parents say the same thing about their children. This political divide is getting worse, not better. As reported by the American Psychological Association this past week, psychiatrists in our country are watching these bitter divisions, and they say that about half adult Americans right now are experiencing what they term electoral stress. And they worry that such stress will not automatically subside next Wednesday. There will be many Americans so worked up emotionally in this election who will continue to experience stress and bitter disappointment over the outcome, no matter who wins. Their emotional health will be scarred for some time to come. What does this forebode for us then as a nation, as we try to move forward after the election, to come together to support our new government leaders and to work for the common good? Will there be any sense of a common good left? Or will we be living in different realities, feeling we have been cheated by the results and unwilling to believe there are any fundamental values left which unite us? Are we becoming different Americans? I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that we have not been so divided publicly as a nation since the eve of the Civil War a century and a half ago. What can we do to restore empathy? First of all, what is causing such a decline in empathy among us? Perhaps it could be due to the growing confusion and pain many Americans are experiencing with loss of jobs in middle age, as corporations move abroad and new jobs require education and training which they don't have. Could it be the rapid cultural changes going on in our society, with women needing to become breadwinners in families, grandparents needing to raise children in face of growing parental opioid addiction, the recognition of LGBT rights in so many institutions, the growing coloring of the American populace, and the loss of white male power? It could be a combination of all of these factors. What is clear is that many of us, due to our own pain and confusion with these factors and our inability to cope in our personal lives, are sometimes losing the ability to understand and sympathize with the experiences and feelings of others in politics. We are losing empathy sometimes in our private life, and that spills over to our political life. Now, where is religion in this crisis? All religions teach that there is a presence in every human being of something divine or spiritual that provides a deep bond of unity among all people. The religions of the book, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all believe in the same scriptural passage in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. He created them in his image. Male and female, he created them. For these three traditions, what they believe is that God is actually in every human being. And that is why the commandments of Moses were given, to promote respect for the sacredness of every person who reveals the divine to us. Sometimes this is one of the most underemphasized doctrines in Christianity. Just last week in my world religion class at Ripon College, I was discussing the religion of Judaism. And I explained this passage from the Jewish scriptures, from Genesis, and explained why Jewish people are so keen on keeping the commandments, since an act of disrespect against any other person is also blasphemy against God. The looks on the faces of several students in front of me were puzzled and indicated to me that they had never heard this before, even though most of them grew up Lutheran, Catholic, or evangelical. Eastern religions teach something very similar. For Hindus who believe in a divine force called Brahman, they teach that the human soul is actually a piece of Brahman, and also emphasize the importance of practicing respect towards others and as an encounter with the divine. The common greeting when a Hindu meets another person, whether they be Hindu or not, is namaste. And in Sanskrit, that means, I bow to the divine in you. Profound. Buddhists do not believe in a transcendent divine person or force beyond this world, but they teach that all living beings, humans, animals, vegetation, share in a spiritual power that unites us all in one sacred reality. The Buddhists say when we disrespect or hate others, we are actually destroying ourselves. Native Americans believe that the Great Spirit is present everywhere, in every human, animal, and plant. All creation deserves our reverence. And Native Americans tell us before we judge another person, we need to walk a mile in their moccasins. This is practicing empathy. Confucius taught that the order of heaven was to be realized on earth through ethical behavior, and that if one could not respect humans, there was no way one could understand the gods, nor have a relationship with the gods. Confucius actually, I think, would be horrified were he to visit the United States right now, and if he went around to our cities, watched our television ads, attended political rallies, I think he would conclude that many of us are practical atheists by our actions, even if we profess in word that we believe in God. The vast majority of Americans identify with one of these religions. 80% in this country profess to be Christian, and about 5% other religions. Even the remaining 15% of Americans today who no longer identify with any organized religion would characterize themselves as spiritual, and they're trying to live moral lives espousing very similar ethical ideals and values taught by the great religions of the world. Why then are these great traditions, religious and humanist, not nurturing empathy in our political discourse today? They have been powerful influences in our past. Why not today? Is it because many interpret the separation of church and state to mean that we can behave one way in houses of worship and a completely different way in politics? Is it that some believe it is faith alone that saves, and behavior has nothing to do with it, so why bother being moral in politics? Is it that greed and hunger for power have overwhelmed a sense of decency among many of us, so that neither religious nor humanist values affect us, since they're only really skin deep in our lives? Is it partly due to the relative silence of religious and moral leaders in face of public disrespect and hatred, something that did not occur 60 years ago during the civil rights and the anti-war movements, when the clergy were out front in word and deed, prophetically reminding us of our responsibilities to act justly to one another and to stop violence? I personally am puzzled by all of this. I know many of those who experience tension in their own families and friendships over politics, and a good number who attend and yell at political rallies must be attending houses of worship regularly or occasionally. Statistically, this must be the fact. 10,000, 25,000 at some rallies. Some of those must be at least professing something, either humanist or religious values. What is going on in churches, houses of worship, in face of the stress that people are facing in their civic lives? Why are not religious leaders addressing these issues of fear and hatred in their messages? Or doing so only in very general ways by saying we need to love everybody, with no specific applications to our own context today? Are the clergy afraid of violating IRS rules about not preaching partisan politics? They're not reluctant to condemn abortion and gay marriage in sermons. Why are they reluctant to condemn serious disrespect and sometimes hatred for one another in politics? This is not partisan politics. This is their duty as moral and religious leaders. Are some pastors perhaps afraid of losing members of their congregations? Something Jesus was willing to do to speak the truth, even at the risk of his own life. However, it's very easy for us to sit here and point the finger at religious leaders. Whether or not they meet their responsibility to warn us of the consequences of public disrespect and hatred We as individual citizens and as religious communities have an obligation to help one another. Glenn Beck, not normally known for being politically objective, in an interview on Meet the Press a month ago, said something I think was very wise. He professed that he was really worried about how the new president will be able to govern effectively given the severe polarization in the country. The only hope for coming together after the election, he said, was for reconciliation to begin at the local level. What is each of us doing? Do we periodically throw gasoline on the fire in the way we talk about candidates for office? Do we cluster in political conversations only among like-minded folks who think like we do? What are we personally and as a fellowship going to do once this election is over to promote reconciliation across political lines? Whether or not my or your candidate wins or loses on Tuesday, are we going to practice empathy? Truly find some ways to reach out and to understand and sense the experience and the feelings of those on the other side, and work to restore bonds of mutual respect with one another? Will we try to understand why some feel so emotional about the election and where their anger or hatred is really coming from? What is the disappointment and pain they're experiencing to smother their rational faculties of reflection? Where is the common ground that we can reestablish with them so that we can agree to disagree respectfully and work together to reconstruct civility in our political discourse? We are doomed to another 4 years of political stalemate if we do not try to do this. And we all will suffer as a country. Many critical issues face the nation right now that need to be addressed in the next few years. Economic growth with equity, terrorism at home and abroad, immigration reform, community police relations, protecting the environment, to mention just a few. These challenges cannot be met effectively unless we as a people come together and let our elected officials know that we want them to work together as we are doing as citizens. What will I do after Tuesday constructively to practice empathy as a college professor? What is this fellowship going to do practically to make empathy happen again in our community?